Hey guys, welcome to JR's Junk Drawer. I'm JR, this is Boots, and this is Dukina. In the last few weeks, I've really gotten into playing some Genshin Impact, as I'm sure a lot of us have. So a friend of mine made the suggestion that today's painting be based on one of the first characters I summoned.
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Xiangling.
Today's project will be some Xiangling fan art. I'm really excited about this, but I do hope I'm saying the name correctly. Apologies in advance if I am butchering it. It's going to be interesting seeing how I handle her elaborate clothing, which is something I don't have a lot of practice at, as well as all the props and ingredients that I'm already considering because she's a cook. I do have some channel milestones that I want to talk about, but that can wait till the end of the video. For now, let's get started. The scene I have pictured is Xiangling leaning over a table with all her wacky ingredients laid out in front of her. And I feel like it would also be a cute addition to have her bear Guoba peering over her shoulder at the food preparation. It provides more opportunities to express emotion into a scene if you include the presence of a second character. And in that context, I would consider anyone or even thing to be a second character. Like, it could be an item. Example, I might consider a cell phone to be a secondary character, as long as it provided an additional focal point to an image that also added context to the story. On this image, I'm aiming for 3 focal points: primary, secondary, and tertiary, especially looking to nail down that expression for Xiangling, which is so on point for her personality. Drooling a bit while thinking about the food she's cooking, that's like 101 her character type. I did decide on tweaking how I approach my art style for this painting. I want to keep Xiangling's anime proportions all the way to the end, so pretty similar to how I handled painting Naruto a few weeks ago. But I do want to see if I can make improvements to that technique as I go. For those elements that I'm not quite sure how I want to handle, like her hair, I filled in placeholder concepts until I was ready to further refine those details at a later stage. One important note to know would be that I have kept her head and hair on separate layers to make all my changes easier later down the line. Overall, I've really got a good feeling about this, so I'm going to try to make this work. Finishing up the first round of basic refinement, I was ready to start piddling around with the background. And while I entertained the idea of an abstract background for a short while, I did decide that goes against the concept I wanted. I want to build a full scene with this painting, and in my mind, that requires some solidity to the background. So to get a jump on the perspective, as well as the concept, I went out and took a picture of a small koi pond, dropped it in, and got to work repainting. I added a bunch of ferns to the background, as well as a few reed-like pond weeds. Lastly, I shifted the lighting to have more of a dappling effect, as it would sparkle through what would presumably be some trees overhead. I've always liked that look of dappled lighting, and I've never tried to incorporate it before. And this scene, this painting, feels like the right chance to give it a try. Once the background started to take shape, I moved back to refining some of Xiangling's clothing, primarily working on bringing out some of the smaller details scattered throughout her outfit, referring back to my reference material to decide where to stay true to the original design and where I might want to make small alterations. From there, I went straight into rebalancing the lighting on her skin, and while I don't have any practice with dappled lighting, I managed to muddle through after going outside to take a picture of my own arm under a tree, simulating the same lighting effects. It helps to always consider yourself as possible reference material when you find something you're struggling with. I've had several occasions when something I'm drawing just doesn't look right, and often the best solution is to pop in front of a camera to work through whatever is stumping me. Even if it ends up feeling a little awkward striking some of the more limber poses, it almost always ends up helping. Moving up to work on Xiangling's face, I quickly found that the initial expression I had was lacking. To be blunt, it had the depth of an absent-minded zombie, but that's fixable. One big thing we need to do is to liquefy the bottoms of these eyes up just a bit. When you smile, your cheeks move up, which in turn deforms the bottom of your eyes upwards. This creates an expression that's perceived as more joyful or happy. Once I was finished making Xiangling's expression more emotive, I was ready to get started on replacing that placeholder hair. I chose to keep the basic shape, instead focusing my immediate attention on color, lighting, and contrast. I started by darkening it significantly, and increased that saturation. Next step was to work on the highlights. I tried out a few concepts before settling on a gentle shine for the hair. And of course, I can't forget about her hair clip. It actually has a cute little pattern on it that I'm guessing is a paw print. At least that's what my first impression was. Now everything's relative, so after adding so much beautiful detailing to the hair, the eyes and face will also require some touch-ups and more shadows to match the new contrast levels. At this point, the hair and face remained relatively unchanged all the way to the finished painting, which is unusual for me. Normally, I would end up making one or more passes on the head before I would consider it finished. But I was so happy with these results that I didn't feel like making any alterations, especially anything that might mess something up. Instead, I chose to put my remaining effort into making the rest of the painting as good as I could. Starting with the gauntlets, I tried to really make those gold embellishments pop, to draw the viewer's eye to the intricate design, before I moved down to work on the fingers. Repainting her upper torso went pretty smoothly, mostly just choosing where to have the light fall, as well as adding in some of the more intricate details that I left out on my first pass. Working on her little, talisman bear she keeps on her hip, which, by the way, I think is absolutely adorable. So kudos to the original artists that came up with that design. For me, it was interesting painting that bell. I used a combination of add and multiply blending modes to flush out the metallic look, and I think it turned out great. As we zoom out, you can see the alterations I'm making to the shadows across Xiangling's body. I'm using another layer with the multiply blending mode on all her clothing to give the shadows a slightly greener tint. And I'm trying to give a gradient to it, so I'm adding a little bit more on the ones that are even further away from the light source. The glow from her vision, the fire medallion, comes from another blending mode layer. I use these a lot, with the blending mode set to add. Xiangling's expression isn't the only one that matters, so I did give Guoba's facial features a similar makeover, bumping up the bottom of his eyes. But I decided to keep the more serious eyebrows to give him more focus staring at that food. Which I know isn't there yet. At the moment, the table is just a brown blob in the corner of the screen. But I promise it's next on the list, right after I finish getting sidetracked on refining the background. Again. The wood grain you see on the table, I used a default Procreate brush, one of the dry brushes, to really fill in that texture nicely. I'll put up the exact brush in post. Finally getting around to working on her cooking tools and ingredients, I brainstormed some ideas, starting with the larger items, a plate, a knife, cutting board. But I really wanted to work in having a slime somewhere on the table. Then it occurred to me that a nice two-handled pot would be right about the right size for a small slime. And to give him the right, liquid type of consistency where he visually appears as a fluid, I needed to give him some transparency. So I traced the contours of where the pot would be through him, giving him a more transparent look. Now with all the larger items having a nice space on the table, it was time to start filling in the gaps with smaller ideas. I want this table to feel like it's got a lot of stuff on it. A flower here, a lizard tail there. You get the idea, and slowly but surely the table starts to really fill in. And I should mention for the people who might not have played Genshin Impact that these sorts of cooking ingredients are very much in character for Xiangling. She is the type to craft an expertly prepared meal out of anything and everything that would pique her interest. Honestly, I probably could have gone crazier with the ingredients, but I ran out of room on the table. One of the smaller elements that I do want to highlight is the fact that I pulled from one of the patterns on Xiangling's outfit to add continuity to the plates. And like a lot of my other paintings, my last step is to come back in to finalize all my lighting effects that go on top of the other layers. And apart from the god rays coming in from the left side, I also shifted the background color more blue to give a little more separation to the dominantly warm colored foreground. And all done. Wow, this was a long painting, but I feel like we've really brought these characters to life, and I'm so happy with how this turned out. The flow of this image really works well. The way Xiangling's eyes really pull you in, and following Guoba's line of sight leads you to the table. It forms a nice, balance between the three primary characters that I wanted this painting to have. And it all comes together to tell the story, from the intricacy of her hip-mounted accessories to the array of ingredients she has laid out in front of her. In particularly, I loved experimenting with the unique texture that the slime poses. I wanted it to have the visual impression of a living ball of gelatin. And I tried to really emphasize that with the veiny structure that I have spreading out from its core. Before we move on, I want to thank all my friends that suggested that I do some Genshin Impact fan art. It was a great idea and I loved every second of it. And by all means, if any of you've got a suggestion for a Genshin Impact character you'd like to see me paint, please comment down below. I'd love to hear your ideas. And if you made it this far in the video, let me know by commenting down below Emergency Food Paimon. A little inside joke for those of you who have played the game. I did put together a few quick sketches that I couldn't find a place for in this video. I'm still decently happy with them, so I thought I'd release a shortened episode for those in a few days. Something that will probably have like minimal dialogue, mostly some nice music, and a straightforward speed paint of some character sketches. Nothing too complicated, just some additional content while I get to work on the next big painting. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. It ended up being a bit more complex than I first expected, but I had a blast every step of the way, so I hope you did too. If you'd like to help out the channel, probably the most powerful thing you could do would be to share the video with a friend. It sounds simple, but it really is incredibly helpful. One of the things I'm struggling with probably the most is the fact that as a small channel, it's difficult to reach a wider audience. But we are starting to make progress. In fact, as of the recording of this episode, we just hit 100 subscribers. I am really thrilled, and thank you all for the amazing level of support down in the comments and everyone who's taken the time to subscribe. Thank you to each and every one of you. But I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope to see you all next time.